For fans of fantasy, the name J.R.R. Tolkien rings a bell that awakens and excites our inner nerd.
One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. Oh, Jesus.
The beloved author is responsible for the breathtaking stories of Middle-earth, which not only defined, but created the fantasy genre as we know it today. And if you're a film lover, like us at JoBlo, or hell, if you've ever seen a movie at all, you're probably familiar with the subject of today's episode. A trilogy that revolutionized the way we consume one of the most famous stories in fiction history. A trilogy that pulled off the impossible both behind the camera and on the big screen. From annual movie marathons to memes, merch, and pop culture references, the Lord of the Rings franchise has remained a permanent fixture in the zeitgeist and given new meaning to the term fantasy epic.
Yes, it's one of my favorite stories.
Now, this franchise is so massive in scope and scale that we're going to be covering about as much ground as Frodo from the Shire to Mount Doom. But the goal is to make this a fully comprehensive guide to the Lord of the Rings trilogy and all the colorful characters and moments that make it what it is. So gather your crew, pack some lambas bread, and sharpen your blades, because we're headed out on an adventure and breaking down just what the f you need to know about the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Alright, if you're not familiar with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, let's get you caught up to speed on the basic premise of the story. The Lord of the Rings follows a long and challenging journey of a young hobbit who must lead his friends across miles of dangerous terrain in order to destroy a magical ring that stands to bring upon the end of days.
One ring to rule them all.
The ring itself, or the One Ring as it's also known, was forged with the evil forces of Sauron and brings nothing but danger, darkness, and death to those caught in its path. Along the way, we meet many intriguing and whimsical characters who both enrich in the world as well as scare the shit out of some of us.
Are you frightened?
But what Peter Jackson was able to do with these films is beyond impressive. The visuals of this movie are incredible, and the story unfolding complements the outrageous scope of the world built in these movies. It's one of the few trilogies that I really think deserves the perfect treatment. Now, these movies are long, and the story is very epic, so needless to say, we're in for quite a journey. Literally.
I do not ask you to come with me, Sam. I know, Mr. Frodo.
But before we continue on, please make sure to drop a like on this video and subscribe for the best in movie content.
It would be wise, my friend.
Now, considering that all three of these movies are one linear narrative, in the interest of keeping this video comprehensive, we're gonna shake things up a little bit and cover the trilogy's most important characters first. So let's go. Sauron and the One Ring. The ring is a mysterious and powerful artifact which was forged in evil by the Dark Lord Sauron. The ring is drawn to its creator and possesses magical powers that entice those who use it and seduce them into evil. Frodo Baggins. Frodo is a hobbit, which in the context of this story is similar to a human but much smaller and more adorable. Hobbits are notoriously chill creatures who just want to smoke, eat, party, and live in peace. Kinda like me.
The finest weed in the South Valley.
Frodo is a young hobbit who is not a stereotypical hero, but more of a lovable boy-next-door type who grows into a hero throughout his arc in the trilogy. Gandalf the Grey. Gandalf is a wizard who is powerful, wise, and f***ing hardcore.
You shall not pass!
He's basically Frodo's protector and one of his companions throughout the journey, and has many of my personal favorite scenes within this trilogy. Bilbo Baggins. Bilbo is Frodo's uncle and the one who gives Frodo the ring and thus the responsibility to destroy it. Bilbo is an adventurer and an old friend of Gandalf, and he's also the center of the Hobbit trilogy, which we'll be covering in a future episode, so stay tuned for that. Samwise Gamgee. Sam, also a hobbit, is Frodo's gardener slash BFF who joins him on the journey. Sam is loyal, humorous, and endlessly brave when it comes to fighting for his friends.
Samwise the Brave. I want to hear more about Sam.
Gollum, aka Smeagol. Gollum is a sickly, scary, and dangerous creature who previously owned the ring. Though he was once a hobbit, the darkness of the ring seduced him into madness and he transformed into this oddly kinda cute thing that helps Sam and Frodo get to Mount Doom to destroy the ring. You can think of this guy as an addict who's just battling his addiction and constantly being taunted by it for 3 movies. Oof. Merry and Pippin. Frodo's cousin and friend and fellow hobbits. Merry and Pippin are the comic relief, but also the charming and heartfelt core of their own side story. They're always hungry, they're always thirsty, and they're always looking for something to smoke.
We are sitting on a field of victory, enjoying a few well-earned comforts.
Aragorn. This dude is just f***ing cool, am I right?
Yes.
Aragorn is the muscle of the crew, but also the estranged heir to the throne of Gondor, a neighboring kingdom. He's your typical main character type in a supporting role, but he does add savvy, experience, strength, and a strong defense to the core team. I personally would love a solo series following the earlier years of this dude because he has endless potential for great Lord of the Rings content. The Fellowship. We got dwarves, we got elves, and we got knights galore with this ragtag team of warriors. They're Frodo's fellowship who help him fight his way through dangerous foes while waging and winning a war for the ring. Specifically, Legolas, Gimli, and Boromir stand out as characters within this trilogy that we simply cannot live without.
You shouldn't make fun. I was being serious.
The orcs. The orcs are nasty, muddy, scary, killing machines and are very similar to elves, only they're made in like coal and mud and stuff, and they're birthed with one singular purpose: kill everything until the ring is returned to Sauron. These things are terrifying to be sure, but visually, they're very hard to look away from. The ring wraiths. I also want an origin for these creepy bastards. They're basically the undead beings who are drawn to the power of the ring, making them a looming threat to all who possess it. Saruman. Evil Gandalf.
They will find the ring and kill the one who carries it.
Elrond. The Elf King and the father to Aragorn's romantic interest, Arwen. There are plenty more characters to sink your teeth into throughout these movies, but I think this list is getting long enough, and let's face it, we want to get to the good stuff. Now remember, this trilogy is one singular story, which is broken up into 3 films which were shot back to back to back and released 1 year apart from each other. Okay, so let's get into the movies. The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. Man, there are very few things I could say about this movie that you didn't already hear from someone else or think of for yourself. This movie is simply stunning. This one is the setup movie. What happens here dictates your ability to follow the rest of the story, and so needless to say, there's a lot to set up.
Nothing important. That is, I heard a good deal about a ring and a Dark Lord and something about the end of the world, but...
This movie establishes all of our main players throughout various points in the 3-hour runtime. Yes, I said 3-hour runtime. Get used to it. Essentially, Bilbo Baggins is retiring from being retired and decides he wants to travel and work on his great adventure book. Upon leaving, Gandalf, his old friend, encourages him to leave behind his prized possession ring, which Bilbo found during one of his past adventures, as Gandalf can see its power having a negative effect on him.
Business isn't of yours when I deal with my own fate.
I think you've had that ring quite long enough.
Bilbo leaves the ring to Gandalf to give to Frodo and heads off on his own adventure. When Sauron is awakened and begins preparing an army of orcs to find and return the ring, Gandalf sends Frodo and his friends Sam, Merry, and Pippin on a journey to destroy the ring before evil forces can get to it.
The spirit of Sauron endured. His life force is bound to the ring.
This movie is essentially Frodo assembling his crew and the audience learning about the characters, and it's absolutely fantastic. Frodo's journey is essentially him walking from one side of Middle-earth to another, and that must be difficult to make entertaining, but yet this movie is one of my favorites in the trilogy, and arguably the best one, but we'll get into that later. Frodo and his friends get instructions from Gandalf to meet a mysterious man in a tavern who can help them with their quest. The man is revealed to be Aragorn, who leads the hobbits to Rivendell to deliver the ring to the elves.
Welcome to Rivendell, Frodo Baggins.
Now by this point in the movie, we've already been treated to incredible visual effects, which were developed specifically for this project by Weta Digital, a state-of-the-art VFX company. Things like motion capture, which was used to create the small glimpses we get at the frightening shadow that we will eventually come to know as Gollum. Not to mention the incredible set design and gorgeous New Zealand gnolls that perfectly immerse audiences into this magical world. When they get to Rivendell, we learn about Aragorn's romantic interest in Arwen and the complications that come with being an immortal elf in love with a human man. We also get our introductions to Boromir, Gimli, and Legolas. Oh, and Elrond, and they all form their fellowship.
It must be taken deep into Mordor and cast back into the fiery chasm from whence it came.
The incredible character work in this movie is also such a standout. Little gems like the relationship between Boromir and Merry and Pippin are so fun to watch, as Boromir is presented as a tough guy with a rough exterior, but we get to see him soften up a little bit with Merry and Pippin while they train and work together.
Sorry!
I also love seeing the moments where the ring influences people around it. There are these times where a character will do something shady or random or just slightly out of character, and we can see that it's because the ring is causing them to turn on each other. So when I say that this movie sets everything up, that's what I'm talking about. Just imagine a group of friends on a long road trip, but at any point in time, one of those friends could just snap and turn evil. It's like traveling with a ticking time bomb, and it's very exciting.
I cannot.
The group is forced into taking a shortcut through the mines of Moira to avoid Sauron's spies, and this definitely is the most iconic scene in this movie. Gandalf leads them through the mines where they're being slowly pursued by Gollum, who wants his ring back.
Hey, you found my ring! Thanks, I've been looking all over for it.
When the Fellowship encounters two different monsters in this part of the movie, it is so much fun. They meet a troll who they defeat, but not without taking some damage, and they encounter Durin's Bane, a shadow demon or something. Gandalf takes on the demon while the team escapes, and unfortunately, Gandalf does not make it out. But this scene is still a real visual treat. And just when we think things could not get any worse for our Fellowship, let's introduce some betrayal. Boromir is seduced by the ring and attempts to harm and take it off of Frodo, and Merry and Pippin are captured by Sauron's men. That leaves Frodo and Sam forced to continue the journey alone, and they are completely lost in the forest. And then the movie ends.
I don't suppose we'll ever see them again.
Now, I think The Fellowship was a perfect movie to jumpstart audiences' excitement for the remaining two movies. The movie has grossed roughly $897 million between theatrical and video release. And I remember seeing this movie in theaters, and I simply fell in love with the mystical charms of Middle-earth. Now, I'm not sure if this could be considered a hot take, as all three of the movies are awesome, but I think The Two Towers is my personal favorite movie in this trilogy. This movie has it all. So it came out about a year after The Fellowship, and it picks up almost directly where the first movie ends. But instead of picking up the story with Frodo and Sam being lost in the forest, we get a semi-recap of Gandalf's supposed sacrifice in the mines. Only this time, we're treated to an astonishing cinematic ride as we see Gandalf free-falling into a 10-day battle with Durin's Bane. This sequence is f***ing brilliant, and it starts off the movie with a massive spectacle. I'm still obsessed. But where the film really focuses on in the beginning is Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas as they attempt to find and rescue Merry and Pippin, who were kidnapped by Sauron's army.
They may yet be alive. Less than a day ahead of us.
And part of what makes this movie work so well for me is the expansion of those invested in the fate of the ring. As Aragorn and the team look for their friends, they also attempt to prepare neighboring kingdoms and former allies for the war between Sauron's army and the remaining defenses of Middle-earth. I love the idea of preparation before the battle, but what I love even more is the battle itself.
March to Helm's Deep! Leave none alive!
But before we can talk about the amazing Battle of Helm's Deep, we need to check in with Sam and Frodo. So let's do that.
Let's face it, Mr. Frodo. We're lost.
So when we left Frodo and Sam in the previous movie, the two hobbits were lost on their journey and now separated from the rest of the Fellowship. Oh yeah, and they were being tracked by this creepy little goblin-looking creature named Gollum.
They're thieves. They're filthy little thieves.
Now Gollum finally catches up to Frodo and Sam and makes his move to attack them and steal back the ring that he longs for so harshly. Sam wants to kill Gollum from the very beginning, but Frodo actually starts to feel bad for the creature and strikes a deal to spare his life in exchange for safe passage to the gates of Mount Doom. So again, this movie has everything. We get some of my favorite moments in this trilogy just within these 3 hours. Throughout the runtime, the Fellowship, of course with the exception of Frodo and Sam, have been mostly reunited. Gandalf is alive, as we learn in the opening scene, and he's transcended into a higher level of power.
I am Gandalf the White.
Merry and Pippin become friends with Treebeard, a walking and talking tree whose purpose is to protect the forest.
Tree? I am no tree.
And all of them are gearing up to take their place in battle against the orcs and the rest of Sauron's army. So about 30 to 40 minutes of this movie is dedicated to the absolutely brilliant Battle of Helm's Deep. And I cannot stress enough how f***ing cool this battle is.
I have no pointy arrow scoring me!
Aragorn and team have joined forces with a broken kingdom to help protect its citizens, and they are facing impossible odds. It's very 300-esque in that there are about 300 of these soldiers against Sauron's army of thousands. In order to present the battle in a meaningful way while keeping the audience engaged, we also get some iconic moments just kind of casually slipped into the war for good measure. Legolas and Gimli have sort of an under-the-rug rivalry as elves and dwarves aren't typically friends.
It's the beards.
And during the battle, we get a fun little payoff to that as the two compete for who can kill the most orcs. Things like that are just the break from war that we need during this half-hour scene.
Legolas! Two already!
I'm on 17!
Ah!
Also, Gollum plans to betray Sam and Frodo to steal the ring, but it's not really his fault because Frodo and Sam get captured by Boromir's brother, who's seeking revenge for Boromir's death, and Frodo betrays Gollum a little bit to save himself, which I also can't say is Frodo's fault. You know? It's very tricky. It's very, very tricky, but good.
This creature is bound to me. And I to him.
Seriously, between the Gollum stuff and the Battle of Helm's Deep, this is probably my favorite movie of the 3 films. Love it, love it. Man, the opening scene of this movie is great, but also so sad. This movie chooses to open with a flashback sequence which explores the origins of the creature Gollum. We learn that Gollum, aka Smeagol, was once a hobbit who discovered the ring with his cousin Deagle on his birthday. That's right, their names are Smeagol and Deagle.
It's my birthday, and I want it.
The powers of the ring taunt and seduce Smeagol until the rage and desire for the ring cause him to murder his own cousin, steal the ring, and retreat into a cave in the mountains while the ring slowly decays and corrupts his mind until he becomes the creature Gollum. It's pretty intense, and Andy Serkis is always such a treat. In the main story, the Fellowship, now joined by King Theoden, who fought alongside the Fellowship in the Battle of Helm's Deep, they retreat back to safe grounds and celebrate their big win.
Hail the victorious dead!
We learn that Gandalf stole an artifact from Saruman, evil Gandalf, called the Palantir, a crystal ball that can show its viewers activity from other parts of the land or show them the past or future events. Pippin looks into it against Gandalf's wishes and sees Saruman burning down a village, and Gandalf sets out with Pippin to warn them.
A fool, but an honest fool he remains.
Frodo, Sam, and Gollum are still journeying to Mordor to destroy the ring, and Frodo remains unaware that Gollum is planning to betray him. After leading the hobbits into the lair of a giant spider, Frodo gets in a fight with Gollum and knocks him down a cliff, only to be attacked by the spider anyway and seemingly killed. Sam takes the ring and plans to complete the mission, assuming Frodo is dead.
Don't leave me here alone.
But then Sam realizes Frodo is not dead, and then he rescues him from a group of orcs.
Not if I stick to you first.
Sam!
And And now, oh, what time is it? Oh, it's time for another battle scene. We get some more combat brewing in this third movie as the elves have joined the Fellowship and the remaining kingdoms in the War for the Ring. Being that this is the end of the story, we see a few people die in the battle and we get a hell of a lot of good acting. Also, we get some ghosts joining the fight thanks to Aragorn. They win again, and Aragorn marches to Mordor to distract Sauron so that Frodo and Sam can finally finish the mission.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you!
As far as final battles go, I really don't think there's anything missing from this one. Even knowing how it all ends, I still find myself stressed out at the intensity of this movie. So, Sam and Frodo make it to Mount Doom, and they finally seem to be at the end of this incredible journey. But then... Gollum attacks them, but Frodo wins the fight only to succumb to the ring's power and give in to the call at the last minute. Until Gollum gets up and, oh yeah, bites Frodo's f***ing finger off. Frodo throws Gollum and the finger into the lava of Mount Doom, and the Dark Lord is defeated once and for all as Gollum dies with the object of his affection in his hands, and evil is punished. Aragorn becomes king of Gondor and marries Arwen. Gandalf returns the hobbits to the Shire as heroes, and everyone goes on to live their lives. But Frodo's trauma never really leaves him, and eventually he leaves the Shire to be with Bilbo and the elves, while Sam is married with children and stays in the Shire. It's a good ending.
And The Lord of the Rings by Frodo Baggins. You finished it.
Well, folks, that was quite a journey, but I think once you get used to the names that all kind of sound the same and the sheer scope of the entire story, I believe there is no tale better told than The Lord of the Rings. The legacy of this trilogy has of course led to other successful big budget media, as each movie got its own video game spin-off which allowed you to play as all of your favorite characters, as well as a prequel trilogy based on Tolkien's novel called The Hobbit, which we'll also be covering next time. And the most recent Lord of the Rings property to make its way into the picture is the Amazon Prime series, Lord of the Rings: The Rings of Power, which had its first season premiere just last year. The series follows the younger years of Elrond and the elves, as well as some hobbit ancestors of most of our favorite halflings from the first films and original novels. And you can watch our review of that show here on JoBlo Originals, so you know, give that a watch if you're interested. This trilogy is all required viewing, so there's really no need to skip anything as there is very little fat on these films, despite the runtime and the epic story. I also need to mention the highly coveted Lord of the Rings extended editions, which were made available upon the home release of each film. These movies add an additional hour or more to each film and extend a lot of scenes that we saw in the theatrical versions. However, the legend of the Lord of the Rings trilogy has lasted a lifetime, and it will remain a beloved story for lifetimes to come. There are references and influences from Lord of the Rings in just about every piece of fantasy media we've seen since ever. And that, my friends, is what the f you need to know about the Lord of the Rings trilogy. We will see you next time.
We told him to go away. And away he goes, precious!
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some. Imagine a world where elves, wizards, dwarves, and even dragons populate a deep and rich woodland landscape glowing with magic. And within that world, imagine a fairy tale both dark and heroic. A story about a brave and charming hobbit going on a simple adventure rich with entertainment. Now, imagine all of that directed by the Prince of Gothic fairy tales himself, Guillermo del Toro. I mean, we can all wish, but the truth is, that's what almost happened.
He's lying. No, I'm not. Hold his toes over the fire.
J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit novel is the story of Bilbo Baggins, 60 years before the events of The Lord of the Rings, and it follows Bilbo, Gandalf, and a rowdy group of dwarves as they travel Middle-earth to rid an evil dragon from the dwarf's home. Along the way, we meet elves, orcs, and leaders of Middle-earth, and this novel is easily considered to be one of the most beloved works of fiction of all time. It's a small and simple story that explores Bilbo's journey from being a lazy homebody to being the adventurer that we come to know and love.
I'm going on an adventure!
After the success of the Lord of the Rings live-action trilogy, Warner Brothers decided to adapt The Hobbit as a prequel to The Lord of the Rings, obviously, and they were able to get Guillermo del Toro attached to direct. Now, the idea of Guillermo del Toro taking on a smaller version of The Lord of the Rings set in the same canon sounds like something that del Toro would be able to deliver on with 100% chance of success. I mean, del Toro is known for his brilliant practical effects and his ability to add thrills and chills to classic fairy tale lore, so this movie could have been perfectly suited for fans of Tolkien's original works. But unfortunately, del Toro dropped out of the project, and it was soon announced that rather than being a single movie based on the novel, Peter Jackson would not only be returning to the helm as director, but he would be directing an entire trilogy. That's right, friends, after our last episode revisiting the epic and always reliable Lord of the Rings trilogy, we are back to cover just what the f you need to know about the mild headache that is Peter Jackson's The Hobbit trilogy.
I don't mean to be blunt, but I had to speak my mind. I'm sorry.
Now, as always, we're going to be breaking down each film and discussing the important aspects that make up the trilogy. That includes characters, iconic moments, and important story beats. And as we did with The Lord of the Rings, we're going to start by covering the trilogy's most important characters first, which luckily should be fairly short since we covered most of them in our last episode. I feel like I'm going to be referencing that video a lot, so if you haven't seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy or my video on it, I would recommend doing that first. And while you're at it, please drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed.
My dear fella, I never doubted you for a second.
So you know a lot of these people already. Bilbo Baggins, our hero, Gollum, Gandalf, Elrond, Saruman, and Sauron, but we'll get to that later. There is also cameos from most of your favorite characters from the original films, and again, we will definitely get into that, but let's meet the newbies that you need to know. Thorin. Thorin is the dwarf king whose lineage is rooted in a stern hatred for elves and a strong resentment of the dragon that forced his people out of their homes. Thorin's company, the dwarfs. They're basically the majority of Bilbo's crew, and they're mostly all the same, so not a lot to say about these guys individually besides that they're definitely in this trilogy, and there are some moments where they are the only thing keeping me engaged. Smaug the Golden. Smaug is a dragon who forced the dwarves out of their kingdom and now sits in a chamber of gold that Bilbo and his dwarves must take back. He is also played by Benedict Cumberbatch in these movies, so, you know, that's pretty neat. The Necromancer. The Necromancer is Sauron, who has some cool visual scenes in this trilogy, but they don't call him Sauron, they call him the Necromancer, which sounds a hell of a lot cooler than it actually is in the movies. Bjorn.
Sometimes he's a huge black bear, sometimes he's a great strong man.
Need I say more? Bard. A human who ultimately plays a big role in the end of the story. Bard wants to help save Lonely Mountain from Smaug, but only if there's gold in it for him and his village. Alfred. This guy is weird. He's obviously meant to remind us of Wormtongue from the original trilogy, but instead of actually being creepy, he's just f***ing goofy.
Not every man's brave enough to wear a corset.
You're not a man.
And as with any of Tolkien's works, there are plenty of other characters to dive into, but these are the ones that you'll want to know, or at least might find interesting. Alright, so let's get into the movies. Alright folks, if you are a fan of The Hobbit book or the surprisingly entertaining animated film from the 70s, you may find this movie to be a mostly faithful adaptation of the story. It pretty much stays in line with everything that supposedly happens in the book. Again, I've not read it, I'm sorry, I'm looking into it, but I'm busy making videos for you. But yeah, this movie covers a lot of the events from the original story, and as is tradition, the movie opens up with some exposition to explain the story that's about to unfold. The opening establishes a rich dwarf kingdom, which is full of happy dwarves just partying and living the dream until Smaug the Golden swoops in and destroys a nearby town, which forces the dwarves out of Lonely Mountain. And the first note I made when rewatching this movie is that the exposition at the beginning goes on for longer than it really needs to. There isn't much information that needs to be covered in this amount of time, if any of it, and it becomes very distracting once you realize that 25 minutes into the movie, you still have the same amount of information as you did in the first 10 minutes of the movie. I mean, it just keeps going and going and going.
That, my dear Frodo, is where I come in.
But once the main story kicks off, the movie pretty much gets going right away. We meet a young Bilbo Baggins, played here by the legendary Martin Freeman. He's enjoying his wake and bake on his front lawn, and he meets a tall and intimidating old man, and we get to witness the birth of one of Middle-earth's greatest friendships, Gandalf and Bilbo.
Good morning.
What do you mean? Do you mean to wish me a good morning, or do you mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not?
Gandalf tells Bilbo that he needs an adventurer, and Bilbo could not be more turned off by this. See, Gandalf is recruiting Bilbo for Thorin's company, who plan to take back their home from Smaug and restore their kingdom to its former glory.
Now, I don't imagine anyone west of Bree would have much interest in adventures.
I like this scene for the most part. It's fun to see Martin Freeman being in this uncomfortable situation and reacting to the utter chaos happening against his will in his own home. Martin Freeman really shines as the star of this movie. His performance is reminiscent of his take on Dr. John Watson in the hit BBC series Sherlock, which is his best work in my opinion. Similar to The Fellowship of the Ring, this movie gives you all the fun and excitement of a ragtag team getting to know each other while embarking on a simple quest. And I dig it, on paper. Should I just read the book?
It's not ready yet.
Not ready for what?
Reading.
It isn't long before the entire troop is captured by some giant CGI trolls, which don't look bad, but they really don't look that good. Bilbo is able to sneak around the trolls and almost successfully free his company before the trolls catch him and he's forced to improvise.
They're infested with parasites. It's a terrible business. I wouldn't risk it. I really wouldn't.
Now, let's talk about this trilogy's CGI problem. These movies were made in the 2010s when digital effects were beginning their peak, and the fine folks at Warner Brothers decided that the incredible success and booming popularity of the Lord of the Rings trilogy must have had nothing to do with the sharp practical effects and insane attention to character design. These movies obviously have better CGI than the original trilogy, but there is just so much of it that nothing looks like it came from the same world as the previous movies established. The trolls are fine, but just imagine what they would have looked like with some more care and less studio involvement. And the same goes for the dreadful look of the orcs in these films, but I'm just not ready to get into that yet.
Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things.
Then Gandalf and his buddy, Radagast the Brown, show up and take the company to Rivendell after a battle with some of the ugly-ass orcs that I refuse to talk about just yet. And they find out that the necromancer is doing bad magic stuff in a neighboring area, and that's just not gonna fly with our guys. Elrond and the elves tell the company about a secret entrance they can take into the Lonely Mountain. Now, this movie doesn't come anywhere close to being as compelling as The Fellowship. However, what follows is the best chunk of this movie, and it unfortunately is closer to the end than the beginning. So, on their journey to the Lonely Mountain, Bilbo and the company are caught up in a fight with stone giants, and eventually captured by some very creepy goblins.
Who would be so bold as to come armed into my kingdom?
But the crew being captured by the goblins and forced to battle their way out is probably the most entertaining spectacle in this movie, and the effects are not terrible. Although it does kind of make the dwarfs seem more like Avengers than a group of actual warriors. They definitely aren't sweating it in this scene.
Well, that could have been worse.
I'm sorry to say, the best part of the movie is when Bilbo accidentally gets separated from the company and encounters the one, the only, the ugly, but also kinda cute, Gollum. We see Bilbo pick up a small golden ring after Gollum accidentally drops it. You know the one.
One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. Oh, Jesus.
So Gollum goes up to Bilbo and is like, yo, let's play a game. I'm gonna tell you some riddles, and if you win, I'll show you how to get out of here, but if you lose, I'm definitely gonna eat you.
If Baggins loses, we eats it whole.
Fair enough.
Bilbo doesn't want to get eaten, obviously, so he tricks Gollum and races his way out of there. And this is where Bilbo learns that the ring can make you invisible, and he uses that invisibility to almost kill Gollum. But then he chickens out and decides not to. Hey, we've seen this before, haven't we? And by now, Bilbo has become a bit more brave and more invested in the overall adventure. This is nice to see as we come to know Bilbo as a very adventurous hobbit. They get into a battle with some orcs, and I think I'm ready to talk about them now. The orcs look like shit.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't...
But really, they all look like overly smooth CGI creations, and that is disappointing considering that we've seen the orcs look much better with much fewer digital effects. This guy looks like if Drax were a vampire.
You are horrifying to look at, yes.
They do get away and fly away on some birds, which triumphantly fly them over the landscape of Lonely Mountain, where Smaug is awake and not ready to be evicted. Now, as I've said, I did not read the Hobbit book, but while I was watching this movie, I was very curious about what might be written in there. Seeing as this movie is very long and seemingly dense with source material, I consulted a friend who has read the book, and he told me that this movie has almost nothing in common with it. That kind of made sense. This movie continues the journey from the first film and sort of picks up where the last one left off. First of all, if you thought this entire trilogy was about Bilbo Baggins, it's not. I think the first movie pretty much threw all of Bilbo's best moments in it and left him with very little to work with for the next two movies. The group is still being chased by Asog and the orcs, so Gandalf leads them to meet Bjorn, the bear man. While on the run, the team encounters a familiar foe from the original trilogy when they get captured by giant spiders. And this scene is also pretty sweet. Bilbo uses the ring he stole from Gollum to become invisible and aid the dwarves in their survival. It's here where we do get a bit more information about the evil of the ring, which Bilbo begins to realize shortly after using it.
You're not the same hobbit as the one who left the Shire.
They are rescued by yet another familiar fan favorite, Legolas, now joined by the elf Tauriel, who I believe is not part of the original story, but for some reason gets a fair amount of attention in these movies. Legolas and Tauriel take the company to safe ground where they meet King Thranduil.
I offer you my help.
Thorin is not friendly with them right away, as there's still some bad blood from the previous time they met, which was 60 years prior when the elves did not seem to want to help the dwarves with Smaug when they forced him out of Lonely Mountain. That's where I also noticed a huge problem that I have with this movie. There is so much talking and nothing actually being said.
The Feast of Starlight. All light is sacred to the Eldar, but wood elves love best the light of the stars.
Does this guy know how to party or what?
One part that I do like is when Bilbo saves the dwarves from the wood elves, and this is of course otherwise known as the iconic barrel scene. This is just dumb fun in my opinion, since the movie has already established that the dwarves can't die or get hurt in battle. You can accept the fact that this long and impossible barrel scene might actually happen in this world, I guess. Look, it's just fun to see characters who can fight just swinging swords and axes around while fighting off orcs and elves, all while floating down a river in barrels while you enjoy your popcorn and the absurdity of all of it.
How do you... Gato! Uno.
I'm not mad about this scene, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this scene is directly lifted from the novel. I assume all the best parts in this trilogy are. Am I right? Comment down below. Now, by this point, Gandalf does his Gandalf thing and basically bounces to go hunt down Sauron, still known as the Necromancer. And the dwarves do manage to escape with Bilbo, but not before Keely is shot in the leg with a magic arrow. Turns out this arrow was made from the same material that Frodo was stabbed with when he almost became a ringwraith. Bilbo meets Smaug after finding his way into the Lonely Mountain and plans to pull off his heist of the Arkenstone.
Who are you? And where do you come from?
Smaug wakes up and reveals that he is already aware that Sauron has returned and that the dwarves are staging a coup. I like the scene with Smaug, as I'm sure everyone does, because it looks as good as it deserves to. The CGI was clean and sharp, and the massive size of Smaug compared to the tiny stature of Bilbo make for an intense scene that I think makes for probably the best sequence in the entire movie. Benedict Cumberbatch plays Smaug, and his voice is creepy, and his movements are super unnerving. They had Cumberbatch doing motion capture like they did with Gollum, and as a result, the actor really gets to flesh out a physical performance for this heaping dragon. Bilbo and the dwarves have a huge battle with Smaug and end up using his flames to melt down a sea of gold in hopes to bury the dragon underneath it and subdue him. I mentioned before that the dwarves are basically superheroes at this point, and this scene, the hijinks is just turned right up to 11. Oh, and their plan doesn't even work. Smaug doesn't die, he just gets pissed. Okay, don't even ask me who the 5 armies are. Having not read the book, I don't know how anyone can even tell the 5 distinct armies apart. At least for me, it was not made clear in this movie, like, at all. Like, some of these people could easily be confused for other people, and the movies don't do enough to build out these alliances in a way that's really easy to follow. But luckily, the Battle of the 5 Armies is a huge CGI mess anyway, so it doesn't really seem to matter.
If only we could take more of these poor people with us, but they're hardly worth it. I quite agree.
So Smaug dies pretty quickly after Bard shoots him in the back with a black arrow, and Smaug falls hundreds of feet to the ground and crushes some goons who wanted to steal the gold from the Lonely Mountain. So now that Smaug has been defeated and the dwarves have successfully taken back the mountain, you may be wondering how much of the story we have left. Like 2 hours. Why? Honestly, like Bilbo, I don't fucking get the point of it. Sauron is still returning, so I guess it makes some sense that there would be unfinished business. Thorin begins developing something called dragon sickness, which plagues his mind with greed.
Dragon sickness. I've seen it before.
And since this is the first time I've heard about it, I feel confident in saying that this shit must have been completely made up for more unnecessary conflict in this story. There are like 10 subplots brewing up during this trilogy that could easily stretch this video out to a 45-minute essay, but none of it seems to actually play an important role in the story. So if you love the drama, watch the movies and see what you're missing. But I promise it's not much.
Look, I know you doubt me. I know you always have.
Now, I don't know exactly what Sauron wants either at this point, but he summons a shitload of CGI monsters, also known as orcs, and they get involved in the battle. And did I mention just how bad the orcs look now that they aren't real? The humans are also joining the fight, as they were technically the ones who defeated Smaug by Bard shooting his black arrow at him. And they're trying to make a deal with Thorin to get a share of gold for their participation, but Thorin, with his dragon sickness, is not interested. Even Bilbo is over it at this point. He just gets knocked out and doesn't really do anything until the very end of the movie. So, after a very long and completely motiveless war between the residents of Middle-earth, and after a few hours of battle, good prevails over evil, and life for the dwarves and elves and even humans goes back to normal over time. Gandalf and Bilbo head back to the Shire, where Gandalf tells Bilbo that the ring he's carrying may be evil, and warns him about its sinister powers. Bilbo, all casual about it, lies to him and is like, nah, that ring? I lost that thing, buddy. Of course, we all know it isn't lost. And then the movie leads us 60 years further into the future, where we see the events of the original trilogy begin. The end. Now, as with the last trilogy, if you're looking to get the full scope, you probably want to revisit the movies, but if you just want to know the story of The Hobbit and only the important stuff, you should probably just check out the 1977 animated movie. I actually very much enjoyed a 90-minute animation that presents the story as a fairy tale with whimsical creatures and fun adventure. That is not what these movies are about.
A quest to reclaim a homeland and slay a dragon.
Honestly, aside from a few iconic moments from the animation and the book, there seems to be a huge tonal disconnect with the movies. They're nothing like the tone of the animated movie, which I've heard is way more faithful to the book. Of course, I'm counting on all of you to leave me your thoughts on this down below, but if you do want to watch these movies, I honestly think you could skip the second 2 films. They do complete the arc, of course, but just barely. I think you should just watch the animated movie, then watch the first movie in this trilogy. It'll tell you everything you need to know in about half of the time. And for fans of this trilogy, I'm sorry I dumped on it so much. I guess, as with anything else, it's all a matter of taste.
Smaug owes allegiance to no one.
And that, my friends, is what the f*** you need to know about the Hobbit trilogy. We'll see you again soon.